Gourmet Warriors is a beat-em-up launched by Pico Interactive in 2019, though the game was originally launched exclusively in Japan under the name Gurome Sentai Barairo, and I probably just butchered that. The game has an odd and quirky style, gameplay, and sense of humor, often being compared to the Chou Aniki series. I've even seen some people who believe that the game is either part of the Chou Aniki series or a spin-off of those games, but that is actually not true at all. The game just seems somewhat thematically inspired by them. Although this game was highly niche and obscure by the time Pico released it, I was still curious in checking it out. The game comes in a box that does a really good job at emulating Super Nintendo boxes. The biggest difference being that the Pico Interactive release comes in a high quality shiny material, which I feel is a nice upgrade from the Super Nintendo originals. I am a bit unsure on how to rate the cover art though. I love the dark and pastel colors chosen, and I really dig the enemy designs. But the main characters look off, and I'm just not a big fan of their faces, especially Mademoiselle's. I think the biggest reason for this is the fact the game is so clearly Japanese that a manga or anime style would have been a better fit. But I definitely can't say that the cover is bad. If we ignore the faces, the rest is attractive to the eye, especially the colors chosen. On the back of the box, we have text detailing the game's plot and some screenshots. I have to admit, I was a little worried when I saw this small message stating that the game was designed to run on American and Japanese consoles, but made no mention of PAL model Super Nintendos. More on that later. Inside, we find a manual and European-style cartridge. I honestly can't remember if there was an option to select between American or European cartridge styles when I bought this game, as I've had it for months now, and I just never got around to it. But considering Pico Interactive is an American company and the game ships from the US, I'd wager you have the choice between cartridge style. The manual is nice and colorful, while featuring some pretty high quality paper, and I like that we have concept art from various characters and enemies, and this seems to be the original Japanese art. However, I found the manual's contents less than helpful. For example, it mentions explosive attacks and says these have a limited use. But I never found them limited during my gameplay. I could spam them as much as I want with no adverse effects. It also doesn't state every move for each character or each character's culinary preferences, which was something that was at least hinted in the original Japanese instruction booklet. Again, more on that later. It also says something about you getting a game over when the timer reaches 0, but that's actually not true at all. You can even keep playing after the timer reaches 0. All that happens is that you lose all the food you've collected so far. Honestly, it feels like whoever wrote this manual barely made the effort of reading it, or even playing the game for that matter. As for the cartridge, it looks just like the real thing. I'm pretty sure Pico is using the same molds and possibly even the same manufacturers that produced the original PAL cartridges. Because for the life of me, I can't tell any difference between them. If you were to put Gourmet Warriors next to an official cartridge, you'd have a hard time telling the two apart, with the only major difference being the fact that Pico Interactive does not have a Nintendo information sticker on the back. Definitely big props for the authenticity. Overall, I generally like this packaging. It's simple, yes, and it only has the basics, but there's nothing wrong with that. I don't really like how the characters look on the cover, but my biggest issue is the manual, which only has bare bones information, and sometimes not even accurate information at that. Booting at the game, you're quickly introduced to a plot, which I honestly didn't pay too much attention to. It says something about you being in a dystopic cyberpunk future. and the world's food supply is controlled by this evil organization. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, and it's never brought up again, not even during the ending sequence, so I just kind of didn't really care. You're then brought to a character select screen where you can pick between 3 characters. Each have their own different stats and abilities, but you'll probably have a hard time telling them apart, especially at the beginning, as the game doesn't really teach you how to play each one. So yeah, starting out the game, the first thing I noticed was how slow the music sounded, and the odd resolution. In fact, here's how the game runs on my television before I zoomed in the image. Even the counter is taking longer than usual, meaning each second actually lasts longer than it should. It didn't take me long to realize that this game was never properly optimized for PAL consoles. Now I understand why the box didn't make any references to European Super Nintendo models. Anyway, on the surface, the game seems like a regular beat-em-up. You have a normal punching combo, you can grab and punch enemies, that sort of thing. You also have a special move that burns enemies, but is completely worthless in battle. Yes, their health will slowly go down, but if they touch you, suddenly you're the one caught on fire, and you have to touch them back to pass the torch back to them. You also have a button entirely dedicated to posing, and you can even press different directions on the D-pad to change your posing. It's funny the first or second time you do it, but honestly, this is the most useless feature I've ever seen. Like, who even designed this thing? This is the most asinine feature I've ever seen in a video game. No, I'm sorry, but this is just completely asinine.
I see you, baby, shaking that ass, shaking that ass, shaking that ass. I see you, baby, shaking that ass.
Where was I again? Oh, right. But there are a few features that set it apart from other games. For one thing, you have this power-up that creates a clone of yourself, and props to the game developers, because the clone actually does a pretty good job at supporting you. It performs combos, it's aggressive towards enemies you're not fighting, and stays away from the enemies you are fighting, so you don't end up hitting each other. To be fair, even if you do hit each other, you won't take away each other's health, but you are essentially opening each other to an attack. Each enemy you kill drops a piece of food, and for every 2 pieces you pick up, you recover a single pixel of health. This may not seem like a lot, and it isn't, but that's because the idea is to collect as much food as possible, and at the end of each level, you mix 2 ingredients together to create a dish. Hence the name Gourmet Warriors. Different dishes will heal you for different amounts, but the problem is that each character has his or her own culinary preferences. But nowhere in the game do you get any information on who likes what. And yes, this means you don't heal between levels. You only heal for what the dish gives you, or you heal a little bit every time you pick up a clone item. Even the manual is completely barren of information regarding which ingredients produce which dishes, or what you should be giving to who. So it's a complete trial and error process. Which is a shame, because the Japanese manual did at least give you a hint, but you won't find any of that in the English release. The game really tries to go all in on the gourmet part of its name too, right down to the main characters having French names, such as Bonjour, Mademoiselle, and Très bien. It's funny too, because if you put all their names together, you literally get the sentence, "Good day, madam, very well." Still, I can't help but feel like this feature is completely underutilized. What's the point of having dishes that only serve as healing items? Why not have them make you stronger, faster, or learn new moves? That would have made for a much more interesting title. During my first playthrough, I thought it was super odd how enemies took so long to kill. They were basically damage sponges. I'd keep hammering away at them, but even generic foes took way longer to bring down than it should. Not helped by the fact that you only have one life. Yes, if you die even once, it's game over and back to the title screen. Though you do have infinite continues. By the time I reached the third level, I had an epiphany. This one boss fight was taking over 30 minutes for me to defeat, because of the boss's large health and the fact she has 3 different forms to contend with. And it's at that point that I realized something isn't right. There's absolutely no way the developers would do this. And that's when I realized my clones were pulling all sorts of moves that I had no idea on how to perform. And that's when I learned each character has a set of special moves that the game never bothers to teach you, nor are they in the manual. So, for example, if you grab an enemy and press the L button 3 times, you throw them to the end of the screen and they run back at you wrestling style, which you can then finish with a well-timed attack. Or you can grab them and perform a throwing maneuver by pressing the L and R buttons repeatedly. Finally, if you grab them, then press L and R repeatedly plus up on the D-pad, you do an even more powerful throw. You can even throw enemies into the ground, climb on top of them, and pose for the camera. Not gonna lie, that had me cracking up. What I find interesting though is how much damage all of these moves cause. Suddenly, battles went from being extremely drawn out to super fast. And these moves aren't exactly hard to pull off either. You can essentially keep spamming them away as many times as you want against whoever you want with no repercussions, making the entire game a breeze. And you'd think I'm playing this on the easier settings. But no, even at spicy difficulty, the game is still super easy. So yeah, the game went from difficult to extremely easy in an instant, and I had no trouble reaching the ending with every character. I mean, heck, just look at how me and my clone are completely dominating this boss. But at least this did allow me to enjoy better some of the goofier points in Gourmet Warriors. Like for example, the enemy designs. Just look at this foe that resembles a giant moe I had. And once you defeat them, these tiny little men jump out, which you can then squish to finally get rid of them. Or how about a boss that starts out as an attractive anime girl, but then turns into a giant raccoon statue? I have no idea why she does this, but it is kind of funny. There's also a boss that transforms you into a random generic enemy, and you now have to fight using said enemy's skill set. And that's really clever. I also learned that if you press L and R together on the select screen, you can now freely control the cursor and point it anywhere you want. And if you hit some specific locations, you can actually play the entire game as one of the aforementioned generic enemies. And yes, the generic enemies also have a button dedicated to posing. At least, I think that's posing. You also get some playable enemies which self-destruct when they hit a foe. Meaning, once you get your first kill, you also get a game over. Well, that's random. I mean, it's cool we even get this feature at all. Usually that sort of thing is reserved for ROM hacks. And some of these characters are half decent to play as. But a lot of them are kinda pointless and serve little more than a neat curiosity. And well, yeah, that's pretty much it for Gourmet Warriors. There really isn't much more to talk about. With only 5 levels and overpowered moves that are easy to spam, it went from a slog of a game to a complete breeze of a beat-em up. Overall, Gourmet Warriors is an interesting game that has a lot of neat quirks, but never bothers to explain most of them to the player. I know the original Japanese version had something of a cult following, But this is a really difficult title to recommend, because on one side you have interesting attack moves, quirky enemy designs, and a beat-em-up that is unlike anything else I've ever played. But on the other hand, you have a game that's too simple, short, and basic for its own good. I'm guessing it's easier to build a cult following when all you have to do to play the game is downloading a free ROM and stick it in an emulator. But do I recommend actually buying a physical copy? Personally, I don't think it's worth it. But only you can make that decision. Did I have fun with Gourmet Warriors? Absolutely. Do I think it's a good game? It's really not. Still, if this seems like something you'd be into, you can order a physical edition from the Pico Interactive website. If nothing else, this game will be completely different from anything you've ever played before. Hey everyone, thank you for watching Stika's Retro Corner. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. All that fun social media stuff. And if you want to support the channel, check out my Patreon, where you can find all kinds of awesome rewards. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Bye!
Ass.